All right, everybody should be getting the this meeting is recorded warning. Hi everyone. This this training is on behalf of Declare Emergency in Washington D.C. The goal is to help increase our capacity by getting people aligned around what activities we're using to grow, and also to give everyone pointers on how to help grow more effectively. So sort of what to do and how to do it. And if you're experienced at doing outreach, it's how to do it even better, hopefully. I'm co-hosting with Michaelin. Michaelin is part of the DC crew. I'm a longtime member of the New York City Extinction Rebellion chapter, and I was one of the key outreach people in the beginning to help it get to the size that it is today. And I also used to work as a paid community organizer for SEIU, which is the union that represents service employees. It's now the largest union in the US. And I worked on the Justice for Janitors campaign within SEIU, which is a campaign that aligns very closely with some of the tactics of Declare Emergency in terms of really feeding off of protest rather than traditional union organizing tactics. And after that, I worked for the Gamaliel Foundation, which is a network of local sort of and regional community organizations that work with churches primarily. And that's the place where Barack Obama learned how to do community organizing before he moved into politics. So that's really where my training background is. But I would say I learned more building Extinction Rebellion in New York City through direct action than I learned from those things. But it all sort of adds on to a very useful bank of knowledge to share. I see there's 15 of us here. I think it would be super useful just off the bat to figure out where we're all coming in from, because the tactics, the goals, the strategies for how we're going to collaborate around turnout for DC is heavily impacted by who's here and whether it's people from DC, people from New York, people from Rochester area, wherever. So let's do a quick little rundown. I think the easiest way would be maybe I'll call out names, and based on those names, you just say like your name, if you want, where you're from, and to make it fun, let's also ask one prompt question, which is, why would you want to help grow the Declare Emergency movement? So that's our prompt. I'm going to write that prompt in the chat. Why do you want to help grow Declare Emergency? Okay. There's probably going to be a couple people showing up after we start our intros. And so I'll just remind everyone of the prompt after that. And at the end of going through everyone's names, there'll probably be some people who have to raise their hand and say, you didn't call on me. Okay, let's start with Linda. Name, where you're from, and why you want to help grow DC.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Linda. I'm from upstate New York in Rochester. Really glad to be here. Looking forward to this. I want to help grow the climate movement because and Michaelin, thank you for that. My pronouns are she, her. Yeah, so here just because I've tried absolutely everything else in terms of trying to get the government going with regard to the climate crisis. And I did participate in the December roadblocks in December for a climate emergency. And I left feeling that was really something that I felt was effective and was really going to work and has potential to turn this stuff around and get our government going. And so, yeah, thanks, Bill.
Okay, the next person is going to be Anthony, but I want everyone to pause for a second and think about how you could say what you want to say, but in only maybe one sentence. Given that there's 15 people here, we're going to need to get through these a little faster. So it'll be Anthony next, then Fred.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I use he, him pronouns. I am from South Jersey and I organize with Sunrise Movement Newark and Delaware, where I go to college there. I want to help grow declare emergency because I think it's an important way to in the climate movement to have direct action.
Cool. Okay, next was Fred. Yeah, Fred.
Hello, my name is Fred. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm pretty much a newcomer to this movement, even a newcomer to the whole idea of peaceful protest like this. So I feel I'm mainly here to learn. I mean, I do feel that climate change is an extremely important issue, but I really don't know what the grassroots effort is like, and I'd like to find out more about it.
Cool. That's really helpful to know. Okay, I have Lines or Lines, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name.
Hi, my name is Ines. I'm from Rochester with XRA, and
Cool.
yeah, I'm originally from Finland, and I've seen like the Extinction Rebellion there do a lot of roadblocks and gain immense amount of media representation and climate action really becoming big headlines in the biggest media in Finland. So I've seen it actually work in action. So that's really inspiring for me.
Cool. Okay, next we have Casey, then Olivia.
Hi, I'm Casey, she, her. I am from Cornelius, North Carolina. And I'm excited to be a part of this movement because we are in an emergency and we need to act like it.
Cool. Awesome. Linda, I'm sorry, we already did Linda. I got shuffled here. Next, Olivia, then Michael.
Hi, I'm Livia. I'm originally from Northern California, but I go to school in Washington, D.C. I'm also new to all of this, but I'm here and I feel like you said, it's an emergency. We need to be doing something. And so I want to take advantage of where I'm going to school.
Cool. Michael?
I'm Michael. My pronouns will be him. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I organize with Extinction Rebellion NYC and do regenerative culture with them. And I love that there are so many people on the call, like, because we need to escalate. Thanks.
Cool.
Oh, so I can't be here for the whole time, so I'm gonna have to hop off in like 20 minutes.
Well, lucky we're going to have a recording of the session. Okay, next is Michaelan, my co-host, and then after that, Michelle.
My name is Michaelan. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in DC. I'll be here through the action, but I live in Iowa, and I'm excited to help grow this movement because everything's on the line. Yeah, I won't pass it. Bill's doing that.
Okay, Michelle, then Miguel.
My name is Michelle, and I live in Eugene, Oregon. I'm a Canadian, so I'm kind of an implant immigrant. I am with XRA and also with the XR Sirens in Portland. And I am coming your way on a train to be there for the 20th to have them put shackles on me or be successful with our demand. So I'm doing this because, damn it, we're in an emergency. So thank you.
All right, Miguel, then Miran. Miguel, we're not able to hear you. You're still muted. There we go. Still no sound from you, Miguel. I'll let you work on your sound. We'll go to Amiran, and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Miran Božičević, pronouns he or they. I'm originally from Croatia, currently in Michigan, usually based in New Jersey. I've been a co-traveler for, with movements for most of the last 20 odd years. because it was clear to me then that we might be at this point in time. I found out about declare emergency just today on Scientist Rebellion chat. I'm active in Science for the People and Scientist Rebellion. And this is Stefan, by the way.
Hi, I'm Stefan.
Pronouns he, him, I believe. And yeah. And yeah, so,
I love popcorn.
and he's got a bowl of popcorn. Interested in what this is all about. I really don't know much about it. So.
Not really.
He's not really.
Okay.
I'm
Next
just
is
watching for entertainment.
great. Next we have Renata, then Roberta.
Hello, I'm Renata. I'm from Panama, from the country of Panama. So I'm a bit far away from you, but I'm very interested in doing what I can to support your movement, because I think that the United States is the biggest part of the jigsaw puzzle to get out of this terrible emergency. I'm also with Scientist Rebellion. And yes, I think we are in an emergency, so we have to do something about it.
Cool. Now we have Roberta, then Tina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roberta, and I'm calling in from Maine. I'm an aquatic ecologist. I think I became an activist. I mean, I've been interested in saving the earth for a very long time, but I became an activist, I think, around the time of Standing Rock. And I think, kind of like Renata, that the United States is key. It's key because we're the major cause of what is about to be the extinction of most life on the planet. I also am a scientist, so I know the science, and the science is really, really, really scary. And I have grandchildren, and that's why I'm here. It's all urgent. And I think we have a special responsibility as Americans and as privileged folks to step up and do our part in this urgency.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. After Roberta, we have Tina, then William D, then Miguel.
Okay, hi, I'm Tina. I'm over on the West Coast too. I'm close to Michelle. I'm in Vancouver, Washington. And I've been involved with the West Coast Coalition Extinction Rebellion crowd. And I am also planning to head your way over the weekend on a train. And yeah, why do I want to do this? I have a strong aversion to suffering, and we are heading for a lot of suffering for all kinds of living things, and I don't like it, so.
Thank you. Okay, William D. Thank you, William Dixon. We're not hearing you. You're not muted, but we're not getting any sound. Let's skip to Miguel, and then if you figure out your sound, you can try again. Miguel, do you want to try?
Miguel says, hello, I'm having mic issues. I'm Miguel from outside DC, and I'm new to this. I want to make a difference in climate change and be a part of a worthy cause for change.
That's beautiful. Okay, cool. Thanks for typing that in. Okay, and William D, if your sound doesn't work, you could also type a little intro into the chat. And just kind of looking at the spread, it's majority folks from outside DC, not living here. There's a couple people who are not living here who are coming. You know, the first push for this action is going to be in DC. And that means that hopefully the near-term turnout is going to be to get people to go to DC. But we're hoping, of course, that this causes a sort of a chain reaction and that more people will be organizing in other places along the same tactics and demands.
Bill?
And so, yeah.
Bill, you missed Anthony,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, Anthony, I'm so sorry.
To share?
Oh, I think I shared already at the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, my bad. I just missed you in my notes. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah. So let's just say that, let's just frame this way. Our goal is for everybody here to become better at outreach because we all really are aligned around the same things. For the short term, we really want to help the turnout for the action on the 20th, which is 9 days from now. So if you're coming to DC, hopefully you can do a little bit of outreach in DC while you're there. If you're not in DC, you need to be thinking about how the learnings from this meeting are going to help you get people in DC to come to one of the presentations between now and the 20th, if you know anyone, or get people to go to DC as part of this. That's really the first push. And if that's totally impossible, given your networks and where you're located, then I think the next question is how can you think about using these tactics to organize locally? But that's not really our prime directive for why we're putting this training on today, but it's definitely not a bad thing to take away. Okay, the overall sort of like schedule for today, we're hoping to finish it in about an hour and 30 minutes from now. Is there any, is that okay with everyone timing wise? I'll assume that's a yes. And the overall structure is going to go like this. We're going to talk for a few minutes about what is sort of like the key message. I'm sorry, I'm going to mute William for a second. There we go. What is the key message that we're using to recruit? Like, why are we telling people to do this? What is the kind of elevator pitch for direct action to make a dent in this crisis? That is really something that everybody needs to have at the tip of their tongue. And I'm going to go through it. And it's not really an elevator pitch because it's complex, unfortunately. But I have distilled down to what I believe is the skeleton of what needs to be understood and communicated. And of course, in different situations, you're going to want to say different things to different people depending on where they're coming from and what they know, etc. But that skeleton is something that you really need to be listening for your own version of. So I'll lay it out. I'll lay out the logic of it and why the key pieces are there. And I want you to really try to think about how would you like put that in your words and bring it to life. So it's something that you probably want to take detailed notes on and think about how to do it yourself in every context, whether it's giving a talk, running into people on the street, talking to people in your networks, etc. Okay, after we go through that, I'm going to talk about some of the learnings that we've gotten from Extinction Rebellion New York City around how to really leverage the key aspects of the situation to make your organizing more effective. As in, there's things about the fact that this is emergency that you can use to your advantage. It's not all grim. There's something about this emergency that actually allows people to do more than they would otherwise and unlocks passivity once you understand how to go in that direction and what kinds of things to bring up for people. So we're going to talk about some of those more psychological angles that help you motivate people and get them to do more than they would otherwise. And then after that, we're going to talk about the actual activities within growing this organization. So what's Declare Emergency doing? How are they going to grow? How is our outreach going to do that? We're not just going out there to talk people. We're going out there to move them into action, and not just by themselves, but as part of something that can make a difference. So what does that structure look like? What are we asking people to do? And then last, we're going to talk about the key activities that are working now, especially for folks who are going to be in DC anytime between now and the action. How are we doing on the ground recruitment in DC? And there'll be a chance for everybody to sort of think about what steps you can take between now and the 20th to help grow the action in DC. All right, let me jump into it. This next section is, like I said before, it's what is the kind of like key argument to get people to want to take action. And I think this is especially useful for you, Fred, as you're saying that this is kind of new for you. You're not you're not someone who's been in the movement. You don't know what the arguments are these days. You don't even necessarily have like the real logical argument for why people need to be in the streets or doing any kind of civil disobedience. And it's a really tough argument to make for people, especially for newcomers who are like, what do you mean civil disobedience? Can't we try other things first? So that's really the key question. So where are we now, and what is the crisis that we're dealing with, and how do we convince someone that we need to take more extreme action to move us out of this political kind of gridlock? Well, first, it's absolutely critical to establish that we're not talking about an environmental problem when we're talking to people about the climate crisis. This isn't like birds are going to die and the oceans are going to be, the coral is going to die. Of course, those are horrible things, and it's really a crime against future generations that we're killing all of the coral. But the main sort of like reason that we're talking to people is because human civilization is in crisis. The scientists have been sort of raising alarm bells for decades. Some people like Al Gore have been going around trying to like get people to do the right thing, appealing to their conscience and to their practical side and saying, look, this is easier to solve now than it will be in the future. And he's been saying that for like 20 or 30 years. I don't know if he's even still alive doing that, but he's been doing it for, it feels like my whole life. Lots of other people have been doing stuff like that as well. And the crisis hasn't gone away, it's gotten worse. When scientists were explaining this problem, say 22 years ago, they would put out a report and the sort of like main scientists in the world that would be gathered up by a United Nations driven body called the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. And these scientists would say, okay, here's the summary of what we know and how bad it is. And then make predictions. They would say things like, over the next 20 years, we predict that we'll have this much ice loss in the Arctic and we'll predict this temperature change. And scientists who are working on this on the ground will read these reports and say, that is so conservative. That's not really how bad it is. It's way worse than what the IPCC is saying. And we have scientists on this call right now. We have Roberta who's an ecologist, and I'm sure she can tell you. When these scientists are putting together these sort of like aggregated reports, they're super conservative. And it's because scientists are really trying to like not veer too far from what is going to scare people. And I mean, from what essentially they don't want to scare people too much. They don't want to say things that are not that believable. And it's easy for them to say things that fit into our view of the world as a safe place. So they hedge, and they always sort of like pull back on what they're saying. And it's worse than that in that if you look at the predictions that they had made 20 years ago in these reports, you can see that they were way off. As in where we are now, the amount of temperature increase we're looking at now, the amount of ice melt that we have now is way worse than what they said 20 years ago. And then if you look at 16 years ago, the reports were updated, but they didn't update it up to where we are now. And then if you go to 8 years ago and 4 years ago, and you read the reports of the IPCC, they have been consistently wrong, and wrong in the exact same direction, which is they're telling us that it's not as bad as it really is. So we always have to take what they're saying in the IPCC and know it's way worse. However, the latest IPCC report, which we know is also part of the same process, always pulling back, always pulling the punches, they still say things like, we need to address this immediately, or there's going to be major disruption of our climate, and we're going to see things like the desertification of Africa. The African continent will be almost completely uninhabitable. They're saying things like, at 2 degrees, there's going to be huge like weather events that are going to kill people by the thousands every year. And what we're seeing now in terms of crazy weather is going to be nothing compared to what we're going to see at 2 degrees. Now, they're also saying that to hit 2 degrees, we need to achieve all kinds of aggressive kind of limits to carbon. And they only give like limited odds, as in if we cut half of our emissions by 2030 and another almost the rest by 2050, then we have something like a 60% chance of staying within 2 degrees. These numbers are just like, it's like Russian roulette. It's like, are you telling me that it can be worse than that? Are you saying 60%? 60% is all you're giving me? And you're telling me how to cut it that close? This isn't the kind of thing you cut close. This isn't like you push snooze on the alarm clock and they're like, I'll just take a chance and take the next bus and see if I can make it to the job on time. This is like an interview for the job of your life, and you don't cut it close. And people like Greta Thunberg and other activists have been saying, listen, we're kids. This stuff matters to us. Our grandkids are going to be asking us, where were you when they were saying this? Because this is so bad. How could this not be all you're working on all the time? How could every politician not be in emergency meetings all the time right now? So that's kind of the critical thing, is that we need to be able to communicate that a rational response to what the scientists are saying today, combined with an understanding of the history of how they've pulled punches, is that we need to be acting like this is a crazy emergency. And as I say that, it's very abstract. And one thing that you can get out of the IPCC report is things like, we're talking about probabilities that millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people will die. That's what we're talking about. And we're also in a place in the United States, for example, or in the vicinity of DC or New York City, where you're able to affect the levers of power for the whole world. As in, what the United States does is going to affect the whole planet. So if you're able to like move the US government or move the US media system and move Wall Street, you're able to potentially save tens of millions or hundreds of millions of lives. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's really hard to comprehend, but it's absolutely huge. So how is it possible that this gap exists? And this is important to explain to people, because if you say these things to someone and they say, well, this doesn't jive with my reality. Like, if it was that bad, how come everything is normal? The fact is that humans are not perfect. Humans are like, think of themselves as rational beings, but we have these really big psychological sort of like barriers for us to contend with data like this. One is just the fact that we can be in a state of denial when something is too traumatic. And a lot of activists have said this, like, don't tell people the whole truth because you'll just freak people into numbness and passivity. If it's that bad, they won't do anything. And so there's this idea that we pull our punches, we don't tell the truth because you don't want to stop people from acting on a more limited version of it. But the fact is that at some level, I think people can tell that they're not getting the full truth. And the other is that you can't get people into action by not telling them how bad it is. People will detect the bullshit, and that's kind of what's happening. The bigger sort of like environmental groups, like Greenpeace for a while. Nowadays they've come around this. Definitely Sierra Club. All the big guys have said for years, we got to be careful in what we say on this. And unfortunately, that has just created this like collective denial and reinforced the collective denial. But the collective denial, if you ask a psychologist, how do you deal with denial? They don't say, oh, you just reinforce the lies that help you maintain the denial. That's not what a psychologist would say about dealing with denial. How do you deal with denial? You give people the unvarnished truth, and you also give people a way to deal with that truth. As in, there's no point in telling you the ship is sinking if there's no lifeboats and there's no way to stop the ship from sinking. You got to talk about how you're going to stop the ship from sinking. If there's no way to stop the ship from sinking, then we're just screwing ourselves, and we might as well just like go dumb into the depths. So really the whole point of even having a meeting like this today is so that we can talk about how to stop the ship from sinking. But first you got to acknowledge that the ship is sinking. And without those two things, the brain cannot comprehend it. The brain has defense mechanisms that block out information that cause you to be that depressed or that sad or that hopeless. So anything that gives you reason to be totally hopeless, you block it out. I mean, we all live every day with the fact that someday we will die. But that thought does not bounce around in your head all the time. It doesn't. It's too depressing of a thought. We don't want to die, but we don't think about our impending death, even though it's absolutely certain that we will all die. But we don't live our lives really, truly believing and understanding that. It's the same with something like climate collapse. If there was a way to stop ourselves from dying, we'd probably be a lot more obsessed with it. If there was something you could do about it, that might be one of the only things you'd work on. So it's just our brains are configured to kind of blank out things that you can't do anything about. But once you have some way to deal with it, then all of a sudden it's game on. And so our job is to really get people into that game on situation. But it's useful to be able to explain some of these psychological principles to people because it helps them overcome that gap of belief, as in, how could it possibly be the case that as a society, we are all just walking like lemmings off a cliff? How can that be? That doesn't jive with my understanding of humans as rational beings. But it turns out that the social proof element, the sort of like seeing everybody else act like it's normal, is blocking people. The fact that it's such a traumatic fact, it blocks people from taking it seriously. It's just very difficult to live in the truth version of climate collapse. It's hard to hold it in your head and believe it, but it's true and it's there. So that's why we're in the position we're in. Now, politically, we're in this position also because our country has really been in the grips of energy suppliers for generations. Texas oil companies, coal companies. I mean, look who's running the Senate right now is a coal baron. Fossil fuel companies have a really deep grip on our political system. So even though like dealing with climate is a majoritarian issue, taking a proactive step, like even just taxing carbon like they've done in almost all the other major industrialized countries, we just don't do that here. We do tax gasoline, but it's not really a tax on carbon. And in many ways, we subsidize carbon instead. The political power is real, and truth follows power in a way, as in the major narratives of our country reflect essentially what oil companies and gas companies and coal companies want people to think. They fund the media. They have their key people are on the boards of the media companies. There's sort of a lot of power that comes from them not just being rich, but controlling the narrative. And so they've made it out like it's a question of whether the climate is going to hell in a handbasket. It's not a question. There's no real debate, but they've still been able to plant those seeds of doubt. And there's a massive number of people in this country who still believe in some of that doubt, and just keeps driving the opposition and legitimizes the people like Manchin. Okay. So in the political history of this crisis, we've got people who've tried to overcome that power, but they failed over and over and over. They've been working on legislation. Like I said, Al Gore's been kind of like banging this drum for years, trying to create political consensus around this. Lots of other organizations have been working on it. It's been almost treated like another environmental issue, the way it's been handled by most of the major environmental organizations. One of the challenges of climate is that since it affects so many people so uniformly, in the United States at least, it's not easy for like a group of people to say, this is my forest, or this is my species that I care about. There's also the fact that it disproportionately affects the most vulnerable people, just like most crises. I mean, hurricanes, pandemics, it's always the most vulnerable people that take it the hardest. And what that means is that the people in power and the elite who might be able to move the people in power are not as affected. They don't care if people in Bangladesh are going to drown when sea levels rise, or when there's an increase in like extreme weather events that causes lots of people in coastal areas to die. That's not affecting, the people who have the ability to influence Washington. So it's that disproportionate sort of like that divide between who's creating the problem, which is the carbon emitters of the world, and the people suffering, is also slowing down the political response. And so we've gotten to the situation where there is no sort of like national organization that has real clout on climate. There's nobody who's going to do it for us. It's not like, oh, if only I had given more money to them, they would be able to like get things over the edge. Nobody's really pushing anything really close to winning. It's not happening. We're not close to winning on this stuff. The major national organizations right now are really like Sunrise and 350 and Extinction Rebellion, and they're really fringe organizations from the perspective of mainstream Washington politics. And the tactics that most organizations relied on, and the three I mentioned actually are all committed to civil disobedience in their tool set. Among the organizations that aren't, they've really accomplished pretty much nothing. They've done tons of white papers. They've got lots of people to agree to some things, but we've just gotten very little done. Maybe on a state level here and there, there's been some nice laws. In New York City, there's been some really great stuff that happened. The last thing that Mayor de Blasio did on his way out was ban gas in new building construction in New York, which is absolutely amazing. But on a national level, we're nowhere. So there is sort of like an answer to this conundrum. Like when we say that politics has failed, the usual stuff has failed, the people in power today are not capable of doing this. What are we really saying? Like, where is this going? And the next piece is something that I feel like is the absolutely critical link for people. The next piece is the question of how do you change something? What does sociologists and historians say about what you do in a situation like this? Because it's not impossible. There's been crises with like corrupt regimes and majoritarian issues where people have succeeded. There was the end of apartheid. There was the civil rights movement that granted voting rights to Black people. There was women's suffrage in the U.S. There was the overthrow of British Empire in India. And in these movements, you had people that were violently holding on to control against a majoritarian fight, and the people who took back power did it successfully in the last 100 years. So what can we learn from some of these stories? And when I tell people what we've learned, it's in my opinion, just as important as the crisis that we're facing, as in knowing how fucked up we are in terms of where we're headed in our climate, given our carbon emissions. That is only half the story. But knowing that there are historians and sociologists that have painted a path to do something about it, this is really heavy. Because the sociology and the history gives us a way to design a sort of like a choice for people, a moral choice. Today, there's no moral choice. If you recycled and you cut down your carbon emissions, you're not actually doing anything to actually fix the problem. That's not going to do it. Individual action is nowhere near enough to do it. The traditional political methods are obviously not working as well. So if you laid out for someone a choice of something they can do that actually will win this, that is something that is a life-changing moment. And it's really heavy. And when I introduce this choice to people and I'm giving talks or even one-on-one, I make sure that they're ready for this. That if there is a way that you as an individual in this room today, that showing up in this call, that you could make a choice that would actually significantly impact the future of humanity, it really isn't a choice, is it? So I'm going to lay this out, and I'm just going to apologize in advance that once you understand the sociology and the history of it, that it all connects up into something that almost forces us into a pathway of deciding where we are and being on the side of right instead of wrong. And the facts that I want to lay out have come from a sociologist named Rebecca Chenoweth. She studied movements over the last 100 years, and she went through hundreds of different situations where there's a majoritarian conflict, as in most of the people are on the right side of something, and there was a corrupt regime blocking this thing from happening. And people tried all kinds of things to get their issues settled, and she kind of looked at what are all the several hundred major ones and what works and what doesn't. And what she found was really surprising. She found that people who decide to embark on a violent path mostly fail. As in, if you have a large movement and you're trying to deal with a very corrupt government and you take up arms, you can't actually win your fight. What happens is the government is able to use your use of violence against you, and it strengthens the government's position, and it makes this sort of issue your violence rather than whatever the underlying issue was. So violence is actually a really bad predictor, or it goes against being able to succeed in a movement that wants to do major change quickly. She also found that groups that can get large numbers but still continue to consent to the corrupt leadership by following all the laws also don't win. There's not a good track record for people being able to create huge change if you're not willing to essentially withdraw your consent from the government. And by withdrawing consent, it's really things like if you've been told not to march in the streets after 5, you march in the streets after 5. If you've been told that you're not allowed to join the organization, you join the organization. She said that she found that in situations where only 3.5% of the population of a given country was willing to take an action that showed that they're willing to withdraw consent, that they're willing to commit some act of civil disobedience. In those scenarios, the vast majority do succeed in a nonviolent overthrow of that particular policy or administration. And it's happened many times in our lives. So, for example, in Arab Spring, there are several countries that reached that 3.5% point, and countries fell, leadership fell. We saw that happen. In Iceland, there was a very successful revolution where they rewrote the constitution after people came out in large numbers. And there's also been some counterexamples. In Hong Kong, there's a peaceful movement that didn't succeed. But in that case, maybe it's because in Hong Kong, they were not 3.5% of the whole country, if you count China. They were only 3.5% of the country of Hong Kong. So that's a tough one to slot into this analysis. But in the end, It doesn't take everybody. It only takes an enlightened few who are willing to take extreme action and withdraw consent. And what happens is that that action kind of prompts a reaction, but the reaction looks unjustified. So when lots of people are in the streets and the government fights those people, the government's the bad guy. And you get this kind of like rebound effect where your movement grows and the government looks worse. And eventually the police are unwilling to arrest people or unwilling to exert whatever violence it will take to sort of like tamp down whatever the uprising is about. And when you can get to that point where police are not willing to like get out the bayonets or the riot shields or the tear gas, then that is the breakdown that causes the complete shift in political power. And sometimes it means the end of whoever's in charge, and sometimes it means the end of just that policy. But it's enough. That's all it takes. The 3.5% point is just a miraculously low number. Now, that's still not an easy number, because if you think about the US population being around 380 million people, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of people that have to be involved. 9 million people, I think, or so. We're nowhere near 9 million. On a municipal level, in a place like New York City, this is like tens of thousands. And in fact, we actually have gotten close to that. And of course, in New York City, you can see the public policy reflects that, where we have a city council who has declared climate as an emergency, and they've passed laws that are extremely high sacrifice laws. So it works. And in New York City, we're very proud of what we were able to do using direct action and getting lots of people onto the streets. Okay, so 3.5% is a critical number. Once you know that, you realize that it's kind of doable, but of course, we're not 1 million people in this room. There's another dynamic that's really useful and interesting. The 3.5% isn't the end of the story. You don't just win at 3.5%. It's just once you reach that number, you're almost certainly going to grow into what you do need to win. But then the question is, how do you get to 3.5%? And this is where direct action is an extremely useful tool in your tool belt just to get there. So we're not just talking about 3.5% of million of people in the streets tomorrow. We're talking about what do we need to do to get to that number, and that is also informed by history. So in the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, people found that by creating conflicts with the government, by provoking white racists in the South, they were able to get enough attention to get more people to come out. So before this idea of direct action was being used in the US civil rights movement, there was lots of words being said, lots of letters, lots of people waiting to do something, lots of people beseeching the people in power to like change the dynamic. But when direct action happened, when Martin Luther King said, hey, let's do something to totally mess up the Montgomery bus situation, or people said, let's ride on buses and go into bus terminals across Alabama and get people to come out and beat us up and burn the buses. That choice was what got lots of other people in. So you have these people who've been banging their heads against the wall. How do we get people to come? And then all of a sudden they provoked a reaction, and that reaction got a lot more people to come. And that's the magic of direct action. When you do something that shows that there's a choice people can make about morality, as in, do you support the end of the apocalypse, or do you support these people who are like provoking lots of like disruption in our society? People have to make a moral choice, and that moral choice grows the movement. As in, doing direct action gets people's attention. That attention causes people to have to make a moral choice, and that moral choice causes people to join. It causes other people to not join, but you don't need everybody. We're shooting for 3.5% here. And so when you do a direct action that involves people getting arrested or doing major high sacrifice activities, it kind of like pulls on the heartstrings of the people who find out about it. And that is by far the fastest way to grow a movement. It's happened over and over in our lifetimes. When people are willing to do something disruptive, they get the attention, they grow like wildfire. It's happening right now with the Insulate Britain movement in the UK. They have like 40, 50 people started blocking roads every day. And now all of a sudden they're having hundreds of meetings all over the UK. And their next wave of actions is going to be in the thousands. So that dynamic, that's the exact dynamic that we saw in Extinction Rebellion in New York City as well. We did an action the action prompted people to join. They saw pictures of people laying down on the ice skating rink in Rockefeller Center. And that visual of people like laying on ice was something that pulled those heartstrings. And even though those people didn't get arrested, people don't realize that there was that they weren't arrested. It still was enough to get other people to say, hey, I'm going to find out what's going on here. And so we went from 100 people to 800 people in just 6 months, just from those kinds of tactics. So that is the other key piece here. We're asking people to do the thing that has the highest impact on growth of an organization, and speed is not, and time is not on our side. Speed is of the essence. And so the tactics that we're choosing that are most likely to succeed are justified by this sort of like huge psychological and political barrier that we need to break through. And it has worked. It is working where people are trying it around the world today. And so that's kind of the breakthrough that we're exposed to. And that's why there's so many people on this call from all over the place. Some people have heard the siren of this tactic and said, this is the thing. You know, I could be working on a million things in my family, my home, my job, my town, but I know that what Declare Emergency in DC is doing is going to make history. And so I'm coming. I know this is it. And it's because they're following the sociology, the history, the science. Okay, that's a big spiel. I didn't intend for it to take that long. I actually intended for it to only take 25 minutes. And it took more like 30, 35 minutes. But I want to give a quick summary for you guys. The key elements of this logical path from we're fucked to people need to be doing some kind of disruptive direct action that gets attention. That chain link has this. One, the apocalypse is upon us, that what the scientists are saying is not being listened to, and sometimes they're pulling punches. But if you read between the lines, you see that it's way worse than the way people are talking about it. Two, the traditional means of politics have failed. Three, there's psychological explanations for that, so I'm not crazy when I tell you this. Four, that historians and sociologists have found that there are tactics that can work in a situation like this that are quicker than just waiting for things to change. And five, that there is a practical purpose in doing direct action today, even though we're nowhere near 3.5%, which is the way to get to 3.5% is to start disobeying and to start disrupting. And that activity has successfully caused movements to grow around the world for this topic, and in the US along other sort of injustice scenarios, like the US civil rights movement, like the women's suffrage movement in the beginning of the 20th century. So that's the chain link. And if someone has all of those in their head, the entire chain, it's very hard to walk away. It's very hard to say, you know what, this isn't worth my time, because you've just given people the keys to how to become a part of history. It's a huge burden. It's a really huge burden. It's also really exciting, because if you've been living in denial and you've looked inside your head and you said, you know what, I have been kind of keeping these thoughts tamped down because I didn't ever think there was anything I could do, then all of a sudden this chain link can awaken an amazing revelation, which is, my God, I can do something. I can be a part of a seed of the thing that can actually change history. I can move this ship away from the iceberg. I can personally do that. I live in the right time in the right place. Why was I doomed to this generation? Maybe this was my calling. Why was I handed this crisis? Maybe it's because I belong here. Maybe this is where my life has been leading to this moment. This is where I can take my gifts and apply them to helping out the children of my children and have an answer to that question. Grandpa, where were you? Grandma, where were you when this was all happening? How did you let it get like this? You'll have an answer, which is hopefully it's not as bad as it would have been if I hadn't gone all in on this crazy tactic that this dude was telling me on the phone back in January of 2022. Okay, so that's the summary. That's the chain link. Now the next, Michaela and I wanted to set aside a couple minutes to sort of elicit reactions about that chain link, and maybe thinking reactions of were there gaps? Was there something really exciting that really put something together for you? And also, do you feel like this is the kind of thing that you can start to use in your own conversations if you want to get more people involved in direct action around climate. Maybe raise your hand if your camera's on, and you can sort of give a few seconds of reaction if you have something to say. I know everyone's a little nervous. Listen, being nervous makes sense. You're on a Zoom. We're not in the room together. It's hard to tell, when it's your time to talk. But this is the time to be brave. This is like the moment. And like saying how you're feeling right now, or giving a reaction right now is nothing. There's nothing to be afraid of. So raise your hand if you have something to say. We'll only call on a couple people. It's probably not going to be you.
Could you quickly repeat what the question was that we're answering,
So really, the question is really a reaction. So how is this making you feel? Is there anything in this that you feel like is really useful? Are there any big gaps in this? And do you feel like this is the starting point for actually presenting yourself? Like, do you feel like these are good, useful tools for you? Michelle, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Well, I just want to say what you said and how you outlined it was just bang on. And yes, I totally can see myself kind of utilizing a lot of that to go forward and just keep spreading this kind of information. So yeah, and there were things, I can't remember what they were, but there were kind of little things kind of in there that was like, oh yeah, that was helpful. And I should have written them down, and maybe in my 2 pages of notes here I do, and I can let you know what they are if I find them. But yeah.
Anyone else? Liv?
Yeah, so everything, like she said, very well phrased. I actually I took essentially a class about climate change. Like I'm a college student at American University, so it's just so weird to think that I'm learning about an issue that I'm living through in an academic setting and then being graded for. It's just such a weird thing to me. And like you said, I'm in DC. I need to take advantage. Like you said, I feel like it's almost like it was meant for me right now. I don't know. I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm really looking forward to taking action and trying to make a change because, like you said, we're fucked. So.
Cool. This is really useful. I'm glad that it's resonating for you. Unfortunately, there isn't time to hear from everybody, and we're going to jump into our next sort of pieces of this. So the main goal of today is not really what is the situation or to communicate the core crisis. The main goal today is to give you guys tools for really growing a movement. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch into this question of how to really take advantage of aspects of this crisis that give us superpowers for growing movements. It's not all doom and gloom. And once I go through some of this, I think you'll be feeling even more optimistic that you're able to make a difference, and that you're able to grow this. And so I call these the psychological angles. And the first one, I wouldn't say it's a superpower of the movement, but it's something that you need to have in mind, which is there's so much of what I just said that in most people's brains, when they hear it, they're like, this can't possibly be true. People live every single day a different truth. And when you live a different truth every day, you get very committed to that alternate universe, even if it's self-contradictory. You get used to an alternate universe. And then when people say things that contradict your sort of holistic mental model of how the world works and what's really going on, you reject anything that kind of contradicts that. And in order to overcome that, one of the key things that I like to do, and I kind of did it a little bit, I tried to exemplify it in my sort of quick talk I just gave, is the moment of stopping and saying, I'm about to tell you something that's a big deal. I think of it as like passing through a door. I've seen lots of people who are successful presenters around these topics do that exact thing. Like this, I'm about to tell you something, and once I tell you, I can't untell you. That kind of moment is something that we're not used to saying because we don't spend our days explaining to people that there's an apocalypse around the corner. So it's not like a typical conversational tool in your tool belt. But you got to get used to saying it. And I've seen a lot of climate presenters not say it, and I'm like, it just felt weird. You just told people that the world is nothing like they thought it was, but you told it to them in a tone of voice that was like, oh, I think it's going to be really cold tomorrow. And by the way, like 1 billion people could die in Africa if we don't do something about this. It's like, if you don't like express that like change, if you don't like acknowledge the huge change of mental patterns necessary to really live in truth, then it just kind of bounces off. It doesn't feel right. There's also an emotional component to that. For me, I didn't get that emotional when I explained to you guys that kind of quick summary, but sometimes I do. And there was a time when I first really started talking about this with people that I couldn't go on. That once I started really understanding the depth of the crisis and thinking about my kids' lives and what kinds of sacrifices we all need to make, I just couldn't keep going. And I had to kind of get through that and figure out a way for my grief to kind of get under control before I could give more talks, and it worked. But it is super helpful once you're in a position where your grief and your emotions that come out from this are there, because that also is a really good way to unblock people's kind of like defenses. When you have a strong emotion, you transmit that emotion even involuntarily. The other person receives it. There is no rational blocker. They feel the emotion when you have an emotion, and that really underlines everything that you're saying. And so if what you're saying is extremely powerful and you have the emotions going on in your body, those emotions move the people that are hearing what you're saying. And it's really good to be able to have those emotions. You can't block them out. They're critical. Okay. The next is about courage. So, when I introduced the prompt for feedback, the sort of like little prompt, I said, does anybody have any reactions to this? And I said, come on, can someone raise their hand? I'm sure you've been on lots of Zoom calls where the presenter said, can someone raise their hand? No one raises their hand, and then the presenter keeps going. But I didn't stop there. I said, listen, we're facing the apocalypse. And so like raising your hand and suffering the scorn and rejection of the people on this call is nothing compared to the risks we're taking with humanity. That is a line that you can pull on about anything. As in, most outreach activities, most of the things that we need to do to grow this movement, to grow the protest for the 20th, they involve very painful activities that nobody wants to do. Going up to people and asking them to do something where you're most likely going to get rejected. Rejection is hard. The fear of rejection is actually way bigger than the rejection. Once you've been rejected, you realize it was no big deal. But thinking about going out there and doing something, it is freaking hard. I was reading the story about Diane Nash, one of the freedom riders, a very famous organizer from the civil rights movement. Not famous enough, actually, but one of the more prominent people from that movement. She was an organizer of the sit-ins in Nashville where she was going to college. And at the end of the day of her classes, she had to think about the fact that she was going to walk across town, walk into a lunch counter where the people working there did not want her to be there, where the law says she couldn't be there, and where people were going to come up to her and try to physically harass her and get her out of there. She's going to put her body on the line, and she was going to do this against every single other person she was going to see. Like there'd be 1,000 eyes on her of people who hated her. And when they saw her walking towards this place, they would know why she was doing it, and they would spit at her and curse her. She knew she was going to walk through that every single day. But she also knew that she didn't want to live in a world, and she didn't want her kids to live in a world where the kind of treatment she was suffering as a Black person in the South was acceptable, was legal. She wanted to change that. So she had to face all of that hate, all of that rejection, and not just from white people. There are a lot of Black people who said, don't do that. You're just making it worse for everybody. She was in a very small portion of the population who thought this was a worthwhile activity to piss off a bunch of racist white people. And there's a few pictures of people getting, milkshakes dumped on them and cigarettes put out on them. But it took a lot of sit-ins to get those pictures. it took a lot of people walking into those places and sitting there and getting kicked out and getting dragged out day after day after day. And they did it day after day after day. The history books don't tell us that, but this was a daily occurrence for years before it became a national issue. So she had to swallow that pain and fear and rejection, but she did it. And she did it with like a very tenuous set of hopes. I mean, how did she know that that was going to spur a movement that changed U.S. history? We have way more to go on. We have an issue that affects every American, not just Black people. It affects white people and Black people. We have an issue that is life and death for future generations sitting here on our plate. We have the fact that they trailblazed that movement and proved that those tactics worked. She didn't have that. There were no previous sit-in movements to the sit-in movement. There's no previous really successful direct action movements, maybe women's suffrage, but they didn't have much to go on. We have decades of experience to know that this stuff will work. And so we can ask people to do things that require courage, and we can muster courage that is otherwise completely unavailable because we're in a crisis that allows for that courage. And when it's time to do outreach and you're going into the streets and asking people to talk to you, that's a really painful thing. But we have like a superpower in our tool belt that comes from the climate apocalypse that we're facing that allows us to ask people to do things that are otherwise unreasonable asks. So help people find that courage. Give people the reasons for that courage. When you remind people of why that courage is there, you also remind people why all this stuff is happening. So bring out the courage. Don't just ignore that tool in your tool belt. What's worse, rejection or the apocalypse? That's the question that's always on my mind when I'm asking people to go do things. Okay. Time is not on our side. And this is another absolutely critical superpower of this movement. When someone knocks on your door and says, can you do something? And you say yes, they say, okay, we're going to be having a meeting in 2 months. Then you'll go to that meeting in 2 months. And then at that meeting, you plan for something that's going to happen next year. And it's all good. We don't have years. We don't have months. We have weeks. This stuff needs to start happening now. Every single day that we dump more carbon in the atmosphere, it makes this whole thing worse. We're way past the deadline. And every day matters. And one of the killers of movements and organizing is time. It's people taking too long. I mean, students, they show up on day one of the semester, they talk to someone about some cool thing they want to do, they get a quarter of the way through, and then it's finals, and then they never think of it again. If you can't figure out how to make your campaign fit inside a semester, college students are kind of out. And college students have a lot more at stake here than grown-ups. It's time is of the essence. And because we have a good reason for tomorrow to be the day to do the next action, we can actually move fast enough to take advantage of people who are not able to sort of like piece together a multi-year campaign. So time is to our advantage, and it gives us a way of mobilizing more people who are otherwise not capable of staying focused. Another thing that's unlocked because of this crisis is that our choice of medium is open. If we were talking about like something like raising the speed limit or maybe gun rights, if say we were gun rights activists, and we said let's go disrupt things to get our message heard. Anybody seeing that, even a gun rights supporter, would say, that's not okay. You can't go out and do that just for gun rights. Gun rights is not like a life or death issue for the people who are spouting gun rights. It's something they care about, but it's not like the apocalypse happens if there's no gun rights. Although I'm sure there are some people who are gun rights activists who would say that, but it's anyone who understands the climate crisis can understand why it's justifiable to do the outrageous. We're working on a campaign that allows us permission to break out of what's acceptable sort of protest. And that's a huge tool in our tool belt. It gives us a chance to do stunts that get a lot more people involved. For example, blocking streets, hanging banners, going into places you're not allowed, like standing up in a place and giving a speech in like in a classroom or at a courtroom. We have a topic that unlocks those kinds of actions in a way that doesn't make them immediately unjustifiable. And we can use it to our advantage. And unfortunately, we kind of have to, because if our main tactic was something that didn't involve doing things outrageous, people would say, you're telling me it's the end of the world and all you're doing is passing out flyers? It doesn't jibe. It's not plausible. So the act of doing something outrageous, disruptive, is almost a critical part of the message when you're doing it. In New York City, we had teams of people who would get up on the subway, and if you've been on the subway a lot, you would know that this would be extremely against etiquette. But they would stand up in the subway and give a talk about how we're heading into a crisis and people need to rise up and do something about it. They would interrupt people's commutes into work. They would wait till long sections, like when the train was going over the bridge, everyone was sitting there and they'd say, okay, everybody. And of course, half the subway would groan like, okay, here we go again. Another person is going to ask for money on the train. But they would instead talk about the climate. And you know what? People joined our organization as a result of those talks on the train. The medium fit the message. If it was real that we're heading into a crisis, that the apocalypse is upon us and anyone getting involved can make a huge impact, then standing up on the train, it makes sense, it jibes. It also means that yelling is justifiable, like getting a megaphone and going to a place where there's lots of people and explaining this issue is something you would expect to happen if what we're saying is true. So what I'm getting at is that the apocalypse being the topic here unlocks a series of messaging opportunities that are much louder than what would otherwise be available, but also kind of requires them because the medium becomes the message. If all you're doing is flyering and someone sees that, it's not believable that you're talking about the apocalypse. But when you do something that says it's an emergency and you're acting like it's an emergency, it opens up people's brains, and that sort of like herd mentality that nobody's acting like it's an emergency, so why should I? That herd mentality gets sort of attacked by the very choices you make about how you're doing your outreach. And then finally, this topic exposes us to a lot of grief. When you really live in the truth of the matter of what's happening to our planet and how much pain and suffering is going to be caused by this, it's already being caused by this. That grief is something that people need an outlet for. And action is, in my mind, the best antidote to grief. You can grieve, you can sit in that sadness, but the problem doesn't go away. But when you take action, you can feel like, okay, I have a way for this energy, this cycle in my mind that's bringing me down, making me sad, making me suffer. I can turn that into something that's liberating. And so when people are truly understanding of the crisis, we have an opportunity to give them a way out of the grief. So it's a curse, but it's a blessing to give people this kind of truth. And that's also something that you need to keep in mind as you're talking, especially within your own networks, within people that you're close to, people who you know have gotten it. You are like that pill that they can take to kind of break out of suffering. Okay. That is sort of like the key psychological angles, and I hope they're useful to you. Those angles are mostly useful for like one-on-one conversations and group presentations. That's where I use them. They're not that useful for online stuff necessarily. I see some people in the chat are like chit-chatting about Instagram and web stuff. That's a whole nother can of worms that we're not really going to talk about that much today. And at every stage of working with people, whether they're new or whether they're sort of like already working on climate stuff, all of these things are useful for even helping each other get out of a grief pit or remembering how to overcome your fears and break into the next level of effectiveness. All of this stuff is stuff that you need to keep in your tool set and just bring it out all the time. And it's just super useful and it's transformative. Okay. The last two parts of our presentation today are going to be what are the things that we're really trying to get people to do. You know, all this stuff that I'm saying is like psychological, scientific, historical, sociological, but it doesn't matter if there isn't a way for people to actually become part of a body that's actually going to make a difference. And what are we asking people to do? How do they come together? What happens? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and then we're going to talk about how to get people to come in. Like, what are the actual activities that will get people to come in? So the way that I think about our activities is really on a ladder. And it's a ladder because you start out not even really being capable of doing many of the things that the organization needs. Like if someone walks in the door and says, okay, I believe what you're saying, I like this, I want to go stop traffic. It would be a disaster for that person to go out and like disrupt, because you need to have a little bit of discipline around disruption. You don't want to become violent, for example. Violence would be like the death knell of this movement, and you need to have a sort of like a ability to withstand the like the tension that is inevitable in any kind of direct action movement. So there's trainings, there's preparation, there's relationships, there's community, there's vetting people, there's learning how to do outreach, there's going out and doing outreach. There's lots of activities for building up the organization, getting it to where it needs to be to actually start making a lot of noise. And so the ladder is getting people from not knowing anything about what we're doing today and what's going on to being able to be fully active and committing to huge sort of gains on behalf of the organization, either doing some kind of outreach, some kind of action support, or actively being part of direct action and disruption, getting arrested, putting their bodies on the line. All of these activities are things that require sort of a sequence of steps, and I call it a ladder of engagement. So the ladder goes something like this. Someone is sort of like totally non-contacted, and then they become contacted. Maybe they see our Facebook page through a link, or someone sends them an email. Maybe they know someone in this meeting here today, and you call them up and you say, oh, you need to know about this thing. Maybe they're approached on the street, they see a flyer, or they go to a meeting, or someone talks to them or hands them a flyer, or they sign up and then someone gives them a call. So you have people who are uncontacted, they become contacted. Then the first thing you want to do is get them to hear really the logic, the spiel, the sort of talk about why we believe we're heading for extinction and that there's something you can do about it. That talk is happening all the time. So the Declare Emergency Group in DC is having these talks twice a week. I don't know how to get that list, but there's like a form that you can fill out that people are always sharing. And those talks are the starting point. You go into one of those talks and you come out hopefully transformed by some of the sort of chain link idea that I just laid out for you today. That person is then still like relatively low on the ladder. And what you want that person to do next is go to a training on how to do direct action if they're bought into it, or to come to a training like this on how to do mobilizing, or to come to a meeting about how to support direct action, even if they don't want to become an arrestable participant in an action. So that to get someone to go from the talk to that is often a phone call, like a one-on-one phone call from one of the people who are already involved and already organizing things. And sometimes it's not a phone call, but maybe someone just decides, okay, I'm ready to go to that next training, and they get an email about it. So then they go to a training, then they do an action itself. The actions are super transformative. They create a really tight community. When you go to jail with people or when you suffer with people, that's truly a turning point in team building and transforming your identity. And you become really identified with the community, and you become really just like almost a full-time soldier for the movement after that. And there's still tons of more of sort of self-development, leadership development, how to run good meetings, how to sort of identify leaders and develop other people, how to help the organization function well, how to create a good decision-making process that's transparent, keeps the organization democratic, and keeps people wanting to join and trusting that it's going to represent their interests. All of those things are really difficult things as the organization is growing, but the people who are super invested will then start to learn those things and study that. And there's a lot out there, and so you just keep growing and growing as people, and you help each other grow, and that's the ladder. So when you're doing outreach, a lot of the outreach is getting people to come in for that first contact. That's like the top of the funnel. But then it's also getting people to move down that ladder. And the tools that I just laid out today are often useful just for that. So you call someone up who's been to the first meeting, and you can help fill in some of the gaps that they have, and help figure out, like, what are they about? what are their gifts and how can they contribute, and where they could sort of get led into the activities that they can have an impact on. Okay. That it's important to know that, because all the stuff we're doing is really just knowing what the next step is on that ladder. When you talk to someone, you're like, can you come out and get arrested with me tomorrow? That's like a really terrible question to ask someone, because there's a lot of sort of like transformative experiences between knowing that we're in a huge crisis that's going to affect the entire planet and everyone's kids and grandkids significantly, versus knowing that direct action and high sacrifice disruption is the thing to do. Like you just have to go through a lot of steps to get there. And so your goal when you meet someone on the street is not to get them there, it's to get them to come to a talk. That's all. It's a lot easier than getting them to get arrested. It's knowing that there's that ladder, knowing where you're sending people is really useful. Okay, so what are the sort of like inputs into the top of the funnel? These are what I called channels, and Michaelin's going to talk about one of the top channels, but I'm just going to give you an overview of all the channels. And then we're just going to kind of like make plans for what channels we're going to start using at the end of this meeting. So there's a very obvious channel that's looming over us in the age of COVID, which is online. You know, we spend our days in houses rather than out in the world. We're on computers a lot. A lot of people are, not everybody, and there's a lot of people that we forget about who aren't on computers, who are really suffering disconnection as part of the pandemic. But there are a lot of people on computers. And so it's very tempting to think that we can organize this movement by just like going on Facebook and Instagram and getting lots of people to see stuff. But it turns out that if online organizing were effective, you'd see a lot more people doing stuff. It just hasn't really worked. If you don't get out into the world, into the streets, and it's really hard to say this during COVID because it's like a really bad time to be going and having meetings, talking to people on the street. But the fact is that it makes a huge difference if you're able to be with other people in this kind of organizing, or even to have a phone call like what we're having right now. This content is not nearly as good if it's not live. And online organizing is something that is like easy to do, and there's a million websites about how to do it, but I'm not going to talk about that today because I feel like it's not that high impact. You do what you can do, mobilize the networks you can mobilize, use the tools you've got, but this is not going to win. But like if you're home and that's what you're sitting on a computer, you might as well. So I'm just going to leave it to everyone here to think about the online tools they can get people at the very top of the funnel so that they want to come to a presentation or a meeting. But I'm not putting much stock in that as a critical channel, and it's not where I want to spend my time with you today. But again, I'm not saying don't do online organizing. I think that it's just something that you can just do if you know what to do and just follow your instincts on that. The next is other network-based organizing. So when you do online organizing, you're typically reaching out to people that are in your networks. And network-based organizing is like, how do you get people like you to go to something? Now, network-based organizing has its limits. Sometimes, like, the people who hear a message like this are the most educated people and the most privileged people. But until sort of like middle class and working class, like chunks of our population care about this topic, it's going to be too few people, and it's going to be too disconnected from the vast majority of people who are not rich and are not super well educated in this country. So network-based organizing, whether it's online or on any of the other channels I'm going to talk about, have their limits. But if it's all you can do, then of course it's not going to hurt that much, but there are huge limits to anything that you're doing that involves your own networks. Unless you believe that your networks are underrepresented in something like the climate movement already. And that could be the case. I mean, not everybody has like rich, well-educated white networks. And so think of your networks as like you're predetermining some of the demographics and beliefs of the people who are joining. But I believe that you really want to think about how to mix things up, how to create a wide-ranging, diverse, large tent movement that has people from all kinds of backgrounds. And if you limit yourself to only your own networks, you're probably not going to be able to like really shift who is at the table and who has a voice in this movement. Okay, But within network meetings, there's a lot of really useful tactics. In Extinction Rebellion in New York City, we really relied on house meetings. House meetings, like everyone at this meeting today would say, oh, I'll organize something of my friends. I'll have someone like Bill, that's me, come and give a little talk to my friends, and then maybe half of them will want to join up the organization after that. And those kinds of things are super effective. The Bernie Sanders campaign did it. The Obama campaign did it. It's sort of like a very classic tactic for like political organizing, is to get people to organize a house meeting, get all their friends to come, get some speaker, and then some of those people will join the movement. I've probably spoken at like 50 house meetings in New York City. It's a really big tactic. Okay. Another is reaching out to groups that you're in. So like I'm part of work, I have a work group, I have college alumni, I have like trade associations that I'm part of for my career, I have like a religious community or not. I have my extended family. Everyone's part of like groups. And you can reach out to those groups. You can say, hey guys, I'd like to give a little presentation on this thing that I'm really worried about, and I think we should all get involved in it. You say it in your church, you say it at work, you can move people within your groups. And those are, again, our network-based tactics, and they're super useful. But of course, they still will end up replicating whatever the current demographics are of the movement. Other than network-based organizing, you've got what I would call like truly like expansive organizing. And that is what I would call sort of like local-based organizing. It's where you pick an area, you host a meeting in that area, and you court people in that area across all walks of life. So like in DC, you would go to some neighborhood that has people that you feel like, okay, let's see who we can get in this neighborhood to be part of this movement. You would sort of set up a meeting at the local library. You'd put up flyers all around the library. You'd table at the local farmers market. You'd spend like a week in that area, getting all the people you can to come to a meeting in that area. And then people would go to a meeting in that area. And if at that meeting you have like 20 or 30 people that you're able to get on from canvassing and handing out lots of flyers, at that meeting, a good chunk of those people will end up joining the movement. And we've done those in New York City, and it's been super powerful as well. And that's how we sort of like spin up neighborhood groups. So when you start out, you end up with these sort of like very non-representative slice of society. But if you do local neighborhood meetings, you can actually get a really good cross-section of society. And that's been the primary tactic of the DC group. And Michaelan is going to kind of go into that. And it's something that everybody, wherever you are, needs to be able to do. And the learnings from this are useful in all of the channels. So if there's people on this call who are in a place where they believe that where there's no way that they're going to be starting up a local group just for one reason or another, and so this is not like what they wanted, the channel they want to focus on, Michaelan's insights are also going to be useful in some of the other channels that I described. So try to be open your mind to what Michaelan has to share and what learnings they've had with this very, very aggressive and great experience that they've achieved already in DC. Okay, Michaelan, your turn.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. We were gonna do kind of a breakout room and have some like practice conversations with each other tonight. I'm curious, I just want to like get a temp check for everyone. So you can like come off mute or like drop in the chat if you want to have a breakout room and like practice doing a run through canvassing conversation tonight. Please like do a celebration react or like raise your hand or drop it in the chat. And if you just want to hear tips, okay, looks like Bill's giving a thumbs up. And if you just want to do like tips and get a sample script and some resources that I've put together, do like a thumbs down or like point downward. How's everyone feeling? Celebration from Michelle.
I saw a thumbs up from Richard.
And from Anthony.
Linda, I see one thumbs down from someone who just wants tips. That's from Ines.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I promise Ines, we will make this really quick. And it'll be a really brief breakout room where you'll just like run through a sample conversation really quick. So yeah, here is like bunch of resources or like a bunch of tips that I've put together on how to schedule shifts, why it's important to have someone leading each shift, some like general tips for people who join you or volunteer canvassing, and also a sample script. I'll let you know that this resource is a running document. Like we're going to keep updating it as we learn best practices here on the ground in DC. And yeah, I'd say, like, I want to start by saying that the first and most important thing for anyone getting involved with canvassing for the first time is that it's really inherent in American culture that like we're supposed to be polite and respectable and well liked. I think a lot of us are conditioned to show up and be present in a way that's going to be well received. And what I want to ground everyone in on this call is the fact that like your objective in doing this work is not to make friends. Like it's great that we find friends and find community through this work, but that is not your goal. That is not the point of your existence. That is not like why, like your purpose in this world, right? We are here to like build power and to confront a crisis that is already defining our lives and definitely will define our futures. And you are here doing something that is more important than like anything else you will ever do. I think when I first stepped into canvassing, and especially when it became like my full-time job through the last election cycle, it was incredibly intimidating and really painful. And it like brought up a lot of things around anxiety and like depression for me. And I just want to ground everyone in like, you are, when you volunteer, when you show up in the streets to talk to strangers, you're not there to make friends. You're there to do some of the most important work you'll ever do in your life. I also want to say, like, as you're looking through this document, it's incredibly important to be like going through a process to schedule shifts and having someone lead your shift so that it's inviting and welcoming for new people to your organization who are moving up the ladder of engagement, and for people who've never canvassed before, because it can be really intimidating, and because it's nice to have someone on the ground who's like playing a supportive role. There's also a sample script. You can read through it and like use that to practice. But the most important thing is having a solid opening line. We've been using like, how do you feel about the climate emergency? Or how do you, like, are you worried about climate change? This invites people to stop and to have something like, a lot of people have an immediate reaction, and also it like closes the door to waste your time with people who are entrenched in climate denial. I can tell you it's like not going to be worth your time to stand out in public and debate someone about climate change. It's just not. An overwhelming majority of the American public recognizes the reality of climate change and is really worried about it. And that's a great place to start. The other thing you want to remember is to, as you're like doing that opening, share your name and ask for the other person's name. Name recognition is something that is really effective in canvassing, and is a way like for you to jog in your memory how many meaningful conversations that you've had. And following that like opening interaction, it's really great to ask people about, have you seen like questions like that are opening for them to share? Like, have you seen the impacts of climate change in your neighborhood or in your community? How do you feel about how our elected officials are responding to the climate crisis? Something that invites people to share a little bit about themselves and their experiences. And as they do that, you can continue asking questions. If they talk for a long time and have a lot to share right off the bat, that's great. Most people are a little more nervous, and it takes some like additional questioning, like, yeah, like when was the last time you experienced that? Like, what was that like? How did it make you feel? The next step is to share a little bit about yourself. Share like an experience in as brief as you possibly can about like what brought you out to the streets that day, like experiences you've lived through, what you read, what made you really motivated to join a movement taking direct action on climate change. The next step is to be like, explain, that's why I'm out here, would declare emergency, and give a brief like intro statement. In the script, you'll see it's something along the lines of, we're a group that's organizing and planning direct actions in coordination with groups like ours working all over the world. I think that's something that people really resonate with. They get excited to hear about something based in the United States that's also happening in other parts of the world and being like wildly successful. And then you have your hard asks. The first is, can you join a presentation? You'll see in the sample script that's in that document, it mentions like the Thursday and Sunday call. Of course, that might be different for if you're like using this in the future. And then the second ask is for a one-to-one, which is like a individual conversation that you have with someone. And if someone's like really busy, they can't make it for like the next 2 presentations that your group has scheduled, asking for a one-to-one is a way to like share your contact information and continue following up with someone who's interested in getting engaged. And then the last piece I'll mention is it's really important to say thank you and to be positive as you exit that interaction, regardless of how the conversation went. So even as you're being like turned down or rejected, even if someone is like, I'm already, regardless of how the conversation goes, like definitely just be positive and warm at the end, because we don't want to be like fueling hostility or being aggressive while we're out talking to the public. There's also some tips about like choosing locations and venues. And I'll say that it's really important to find someone who lives in the area where you're trying to organize, who knows that area the best, to like decide on where you go. I'll also say like, use foot traffic as the best barometer for a successful venue. We have been really focused on intentional recruitment and making sure to meet these goals around justice, equity, and anti-oppression, to make sure that our group is like representative. But what we found is that when we go to areas with high foot traffic, it doesn't matter like what the demographics of that neighborhood are, we're meeting like a whole diverse host of people, and being able to like engage in conversations with the people that we want to talk to. And yeah, like, don't let like basic research points like dissuade you from showing up to an area that you believe has high foot traffic, because you're going to find people to talk to there that are representative, and you're going to find that regardless of if you're like in a coastal city or in the, like I'm from the Midwest, and I can tell you that areas with high foot traffic, even in a place like Iowa where it's like 95% white, you can find people of color, you can find residents with other marginalized identities that are really important to engage, and are often forgotten in the climate movement. Yeah, so I want everyone to take like a deep breath, if you can with me. Breathe in and out. Awesome. And I'm gonna ask Bill to send us all into breakout rooms, and we're gonna just jump into this. No one here is an expert. The goal is not to get a perfect conversation. The goal is to like put yourself in a mindset of like, oh, this is hard, it's scary, but it's literally something I can do. And it's so essential to growing the power of this movement, and growing the power of any movement we want to win. And it's something that you will continue to use like while you try to engage and fight this system that is put us on a track towards extinction. So yeah, Bill, will you let me know when you're ready to, oh yeah, let's take a 3-minute break, let everyone go to the bathroom, grab a drink of water. We'll come back, we'll make these really quick, and then we'll close out the call. That's good.
Great, so I'm gonna hold off on doing the breakouts until the 3 minutes is over. So let's do our bathroom breaks and then come back, and then I'll kick everyone into the breakouts.
That sounds perfect. I know we're nearing the end of the break, but I appreciate you, Richard, for joining us. And I was wondering if you could share, we did like an introduction at the beginning of the call. I was wondering if you could share like where you're calling in from and one reason you're joining us today. Or specifically, like, why do you want to help grow this movement?
Hi, sorry I was late. I just drove down from Central Florida. I'm in Miami. I actually was a support for Nick's walk across the state of Florida, zigzagging across the state of Florida. I did some of the filming on some of the civil disobedience actions, and well, I want to participate more. We can't do enough to bring enough awareness to get people out, and that's why we spent a couple months supporting Nick and the group. So
that's really
yeah,
awesome.
I need more ammunition. I need to take the facts and I need to study them and be more prepared to have these discussions that we're talking about tonight to grab someone in the fold. So I'm not really ready for a presentation. The thumbs up was how do you feel? But anyway, thank you for your introduction to ways to engage people with a conversation. I appreciate that, Michaela. That's it
Well,
for me
thanks so
for
much
now.
for joining us and for doing that important work. I think everyone is coming back from their break, and it'd be great, Bill, if you want to send. Okay, looks like we have an odd number of people. So if you want to leave ourselves and one other person, maybe Linda or Melissa, who has like been pretty engaged with our team in the main room, and we can do a practice run through. Like I can do a practice run through with them. That'd be great. And we'll send out a message about like 2.5 minutes in to switch. It'll feel really brief. It won't feel like you had a full conversation. But the point is to like get the flow of like how you're going to engage people and what it's going to feel like when you're out in public.
All right, I'm going to create 4 rooms, and that leaves me as the odd one out. And how long should we do it?
I would say 6 minutes, like, and send a message like 2.5 minutes out so people have a chance to switch. And hope is that like each person will like be like, hey, like be the one canvassing, and also the one who's like a passerby getting stopped by a canvasser.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to set 6 minutes. This is going to be a 2-minute warning, and go. Michaela, that was really fun. Thank you for encouraging us to do that. Michaela, we're all back together in the big room.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I'm just curious, like if there like one or two people want to share like how conversations went or how that felt for everyone. Or if you want to drop in the chat, that's okay too. I know it's been a long evening. Thanks for sticking with us. Okay, Linda, I'm gonna put you on the spot if you don't mind. How did it feel for you?
Yeah, so I was in the chat with Anthony, and Anthony's with the Sunrise movement in South Jersey, and and so I wanted to ask him lots of questions about that actually, and we have a Sunrise movement also in Rochester, and I was just wondering if Anthony might be able to help me make connections there, because I've not been able to get a response. But so so we talked about that for a bit, but then I got to that question about, well, what's it going to feel like when you're canvassing and engaging people, and you're really, and one thing that Anthony was really struck by when Bill was talking about was, well, what's worse, telling people about the apocalypse or getting rejected? So that kind of really stuck with him. And so Anthony was just talking about perhaps he is interested in trying out just jumping on public transport, transit like a bus, and standing up and just talking to people about how bad it is and the situation, and taking it from there. And I think that would be a really brave thing to do. And we started talking a bit about our fear of rejection, and talking to a big bunch of strangers that you've never talked to about something as serious as the climate crisis, and having people not believe you, and telling you to sit down and shut up, and are all pretty big kind of existential things that lots of us kind of really worry about. So yeah, that's about as far as we got.
Thanks so much for sharing. I agree. I think this approach or orientation to the climate crisis is a little different than Sunrise, and definitely invites people to have more courage based on grounded in the stakes than I think a lot of other environmental movements. So I'm going to drop my number in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I love supporting people in feeling comfortable with canvassing and running shifts in truly grassroots operations that don't rely on the establishment to build power and talk to our communities. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me anytime, and I'm going to pass it back to Bill.
Great. So there's 8 of us still on the call. I think we lost about half of our people because maybe we didn't set our time expectations very well. We did go past 8:45, and unfortunately, this is so we're down to less than half of the original group. But there's an exercise I want to do at the very end that is really important part of these kinds of trainings, which is trying to figure out what's going to happen next and what we can all expect in terms of recruitment activities. I laid out a range of channels, and some of them were things like talking to people you already know, family members, groups that you're already part of, online organizing, which I kind of don't see as really having that big of an impact. And then there's doing actually canvassing, which is really difficult. But Michaela told me earlier that in the work that they've done, for every hour that they've done it, they've really recruited about one to two people who's committed to come to one of the meetings that are sort of like the twice a week introductory meetings. And at those meetings, we're getting at least 10% of those people committing to further more like high sacrifice activities. And so that kind of tells you like there's a range of ways for people to be engaged, but if we're able to like if you're able to talk to people for 5 hours, you might actually recruit 5 people. And if you can talk to people for 10 hours, you could recruit 10 people. And one of those people may end up becoming one of the sort of like really diehard arrestable activists, and the rest of them could be supportive in other ways for like supporting the actions and the outreach and media and all the other things that need to happen. So what I'm getting to is that within this room here, there's a sort of like a volume of outreach that we can do across all these channels. And people, based on where you are, could only do some of those channels, and some people can do others. But you might have a gut sense of what you could do in terms of getting people to come to one of these meetings. Whether it's one person, that would be like an hour of canvassing. Whether it's talking to 5 of your friends and expecting that to go well, maybe half of the time or a third of the time. Whether it's coming to DC earlier than you were planning to and doing canvassing leading up to the action. If you think in your mind, like, here's what I feel like I can get done between now and the 20th. I think I can get 2 or 3 people, or I think I can get 4 or 5 people to come to one of these introductory meetings. What I want to do is sort of do a go around on that and add up the numbers and see how many more people we can do that. And it's super useful in a few ways. One is that we know that we're all working together and it really can have a much bigger impact as a group than we can just individually. But the other is we need to plan for that as well. As in, are we going to have hundreds of people coming in the door? We're going to have dozens. We're going to have 2 people coming in the door. And that's also really critical information. Now, for the folks who are not here right now, Michaela and I are going to follow up with those folks and sort of get their contribution expectations as well. So that this is not the sum total of all the activities that we're expecting to happen for outreach. And plus, there's a lot of very core organizers that are not on this call that are also doing constant shifts over the next couple of weeks. But for the 8 of us, I'd really like to get that sense, because it gives me a sense of how effective my conversation was with you, how confident you are that you'd be able to get 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe more people to come to one of these introductory talks. So that's what I want to do, is a little go around. And don't exaggerate. Don't say, I think I can get 100 people to come if you feel like you can only get 2 people to come. Just say the truth about what you feel like you're capable of and that you're going to attempt to achieve, and that you believe that that's your best guess as to what you could possibly accomplish. And I'm gonna write down, let me look at the list here. Okay. Take a little, it's always hard doing like a run through of this many people, because everyone forgets who's gone. So I'll just call out names again like I did at the very beginning. Okay, I'm gonna start with McKellen. How many people between now and the 20th do you feel like you'll be able to get to come to one of the introductory talks?
I want to get 6 additional people. Actually,
All right,
7.
that's great.
I'm going to go for 7 additional people between Thursday and Sunday.
McKellen, 7 people. Okay, I'm gonna do myself. And within my networks and outreach I'm doing, I feel like, given that I'm in New York and it's a lot more tenuous of a connection, I'm not in DC and I'm not going to be able to canvass in DC, I'm gonna only be able to get 3 more people to come to one of the introductory talks of who might actually be candidates to come to DC. You from New York. Okay. The next person I have on my list is Anthony. Do you feel like, do you want to give us a number? Are you ready for that?
Yeah, I think I can get 4 people out.
Cool. Now, the next on my list is Linda. Do you want to throw out a number for yourself?
Yeah, so I've got 3 people already coming on Sunday, and I'm going to really set myself a target of getting, I think realistically I could get 4 more.
So you're going to get from 3 up to 7.
Yes.
That's great. Okay, the next person I have on my list is Michelle.
Oh gosh, Tina, I don't know. Are you on my list or? Anyways, it's tough because I'm coming from the West Coast. So I'm going to spending 3 of those days between now and then on a train. So I don't know, maybe Tina and I can talk. We can head out a couple days earlier and help you out there. But anyways, that's just, you know, yeah, that's so maybe one. One if
Okay.
Tina's my girl. So
Tina counts. Okay, Renata.
Okay, well, you know, I'm in Panama, so I'm in a different situation. What I can do is definitely announce your movement again, which I've done it before because I used to help out with social media for Declare Emergency. So I'll mention it again on Scientist Rebellion. But also, and I don't know if it's a really silly question, but I would like to ask a question and for somebody from outside the US, because I don't know well the situation there. With having so many XR groups in the States, wouldn't you expect to have more people to draw from? That's what I am really kind of wondering about.
Let's not answer that now. Let's continue the exercise. And I think that maybe that's a question that we could talk about another time or get in touch with Michaela or myself afterwards. All right. The next person on my list is Richard. And then after Richard, I have Tina.
Okay, I just got it. I was just about looking chat for Michaelan's phone number because I really need more information as far as the meetings and such. I'll try to reach out to a few people and with the hope of getting one or two. But my situation is a little chaotic right now, and it's but I need more info. I need to know when we're having the meetings and that in particular, and I need to know how to share the links or how the links will be shared with the individuals.
Awesome. We're here to totally help you, and Michaela and I can get you that. So I just posted Michaela's number in the chat again, and we'll make sure that you have the links to the where people can sign up for those talks and when they are, etc. Okay, Tina, do you want to throw any numbers into the mix?
Well,
I know you're going to be on the road.
Yeah, I was going to go with a very, very confident 0, but since apparently I get credit for Michelle, I'll up that to a 1. So.
That's great. Okay, so if I put Tina and Richard at 1 and Michelle at 1, Linda is going to be up at 7 by the time the 20th arrives. And between Anthony and Bill, that's another 7. That's 17, and Michaela, that's 7. That's 24 people. So that's pretty amazing. I think so far we've gotten a chunk of that to some of our introductory meetings, and on average we're getting like a little over 10% of those people coming in and get arrested, and so that's 2 more people who are likely to get arrested, which I think that we already are at with this group. I think we know that, so we'll probably get even more than that. And if there's another 7 people who are on this call, there could be another 24 people amongst them that Michaela and I will follow up with them and see how that adds up. So there's potentially 50 more people that are coming into the net who might end up joining or helping grow this. And that's pretty impressive, 50 people at this stage of the game. The organization's only been around for several weeks. So thank you guys so much. This is really exciting. And it's really inspirational that a group like this is going to be able to double and triple the numbers of people who we're already talking to. And Tina's trying to roll back on those commitments, but it's still, you know, at this stage in the game, you got to count the really easy stuff and the hard stuff all together. It really feels amazing to have you guys willing to spend 2 hours on the phone with Michaela and I. It's something that if this doesn't succeed, I don't know what's going to happen. We have to make this work. We do, and I really believe it will work. That something great is going to come out of these efforts. And I know it may seem like a really big long shot and a really high sacrifice operation, but this is what it looks like at the beginning of something huge. And I've seen really successful movements grow from something that started even smaller and seemed more hopeless. And we have exactly what we need. We were called to this moment. And I'm just so grateful to be part of this with you guys and to be helping sort of bridge the past and the future through this conversation and get you guys to a point where you can feel like you're able to grow this organization as well through either direct outreach, getting arrested and making lots of noise, all the things that we can be good at. We're going to do those things. It's so late. We usually like to do a checkout. I'll leave it to, maybe I'll let Michaelan decide what is the right thing to do within the culture of this org of how to close this out.
Yeah, our teams here in DC, before we were all on the ground together, were in the habit of doing cheers at the end of our call. So yeah, if we all want to come off mute and on the count of 3, chant declare emergency together as we leave this call, that would be great. I know, yeah, we're on a Zoom call. It's not the same as meeting in person, but our voices together are more powerful than they are separate. So please come off mute. I'm gonna count to 3. We're all gonna chant declare emergency. 1, 2, 3. Declare emergency. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Hope to see and or talk to you soon. Really excited for those of you who are coming to DC. And feel free to hit me up anytime.